So, as of late, American oligarchs have been up in arms because they notice that the peasants are starting to revolt. And they should be worried because we're coming for that motherfucking wealth, bitch. But anyways, what this is all about is them being outraged at the prospect of paying slightly higher taxes. Also, that way the peasants don't die due to a lack of health insurance. Now, their aggravation with the peasants first started when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently proposed a modest 70% marginal tax rate. Now, let me remind you that under the Eisenhower administration, the marginal tax rate was up to 90%, in fact, higher than 90%. So what she's proposing isn't really all that extreme, but billionaires are offended at the prospect of the peasants getting people in power that actually represent their interests. And what's interesting is that after the billionaires' puppets in Congress, i.e. the Republican Party, tried to fearmonger and pretended as if marginal tax rates aren't a thing, they still failed because they learned that regardless of all of their propaganda, all of the bullshit being peddled by Fox News, this proposal is still incredibly popular. Now, to make matters worse for these oligarchs, presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren recently proposed a wealth tax that's similar to what we see in some European countries, where rather than taxing income, she actually taxes the assets of Americans worth more than $50 million at a 2% rate. And if you're a billionaire, then you get taxed at a 3% rate, which would bring in nearly $3 trillion in federal revenue over the next decade. And that proposal alone could pay for the total cancellation of student loan debt twice. So these are proposals that are really scaring American oligarchs. And that's just from AOC and Elizabeth Warren. We haven't even seen Bernie Sanders' 2020 platform yet. But needless to say, the billionaire class and Wall Street are getting worried. And this is detailed in Politico by Ben White. And he explains how Wall Street is currently losing their shit about the prospect of a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren presidency. He explains top Wall Street executives would love to be rid of President Donald Trump, but they are getting panicked about the prospect of an ultra-liberal Democratic nominee bent on raising taxes and slapping regulations on their firms. Early support from deep-pocketed financial executives could give Democrats seeking to break out of the pack an important fundraising boost, but any association with bankers also opens up presidential hopefuls to sharp attacks from an ascendant left, and it's left senior executives on Wall Street flailing over what to do. Now, here at the Humanist Report, we've actually obtained exclusive footage showing billionaires' reaction and the executives on Wall Street's reaction to the rise of progressives like AOC and their proposals to tax these oligarchs. Here it is. That's the response from most of these oligarchs on Wall Street. However, there are some billionaire oligarchs who are choosing to not just sit around and cry as they watch the peasants revolt. They're instead choosing to take action in order to stop the rise of the peasants. For example, former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz specifically cited AOC's 70% marginal tax rate as the main thing that catalyzed his decision to run as an independent, because if he can spoil the election and deliver Trump a second term, well, even if he doesn't like Trump, that's still a victory for him because then he gets to keep more of his money. Yeah, so they're just admitting what these oligarchs used to keep to themselves before. But he recently went on The View, which I don't know why they would invite him on, but nonetheless, he appeared on The View and he explained that, this isn't just about him trying to keep his money that some progressives want to take, just some of it to maybe pay for healthcare for the peasants, but nonetheless, it's not about that, because he explains that, really, these peasants are just being unrealistic, and all of these presidential candidates running in the Democratic Party primary, they're just telling these peasants what they want to hear when they can't have Medicare for all.
I would have to be disingenuous as a Democrat if I ran as a Democrat, because in order to run as a Democrat today, you have to fall in line with free Medicare for everybody, free college for everybody, a free job for everybody. Let me finish.
But that's what you said you were given to your. That's what you just said you gave everybody.
Not free for the government. And that totals about $40 trillion on top of the fact that we are sitting on a $21 trillion debt in the country today. We can't afford to do it free, so it has to be a different way.
Look, peasants, you can't have Medicare for all, so stop asking about it. We can give tax cuts to billionaires like me, but when it comes to Medicare for all, if you get sick and you don't have health insurance, or you do have health insurance but can't afford your deductible, too bad. Get more money. Stop being poor, peasants. That's essentially his response. And he's so hell-bent on making sure that his taxes don't get raised that he's literally running just to spoil the election. Now, I'm typically against this rhetoric, trying to condemn Greens for being spoilers and whatnot, but if you're just running with the intention of being a spoiler, there's something fundamentally morally reprehensible about that, because you're trying to subvert democracy also that way you can keep a little bit more of your money. How disgusting is that? But Howard Schultz isn't the only oligarch who's telling us peasants that we can't have nice things, because Michael Bloomberg, another 2020 prospect, recently told all of us peasants, no, I agree with Howard, you can't have Medicare for all.
I think you could never afford that. You're talking about trillions of dollars. I think you can have Medicare for all for people that are uncovered, but because that's a smaller group, and a lot of them are taking care of Medicaid already, Medicare. But to replace the entire private system where companies provide health care for their employees would bankrupt us for a very long time.
Hey, moron. Newsflash, we already have, quote, Medicare for all for people who are poor or uncovered. It's called Medicaid, and guess what? People still die under this system, because if you just make a little bit more than the requirements, you make too much money, you go without health insurance. Or if you manage to actually secure health insurance and you get sick and you can't afford your deductible, then you still don't get the care that you need. So the system is fundamentally broken. But what these oligarchs care about is not, what peasants are dealing with. They care about keeping their money because they like being really, really rich. And if you threaten their wealth, then that will impact their lives in a really substantial way. They may have to sell one of their mansions, or maybe go down to just having 2 private jets and maybe have a couple less butlers. And they really don't want to do that. So if, you having healthcare and not dying if you get sick means they have to pay higher taxes and can't have more private jets, then fuck you. And what they don't realize that they're doing now is they're demonstrating, inadvertently so, to ordinary Americans that capitalism is incompatible with democracy. Incompatible. You can't have these two things simultaneously, because if you have an economic system that allows individuals to amass this much wealth, the wealth that is on par with certain small countries, then that can destabilize the entire system. It can be a threat to democracy itself, because these oligarchs become so powerful with this money that they can choose to just self-fund their campaigns and thwart democracy. Maybe get enough votes to tip the scales in favor of the person that will ultimately do their bidding, Donald Trump. So understand that this is unacceptable. Billionaires should not be allowed to run for president, because think about this. If you or I wanted to run for president, would we be capable of self-funding our campaigns? Of course we wouldn't. Richard Ojeda just had to drop out because he was relying on small dollar donors, and he couldn't see it going anywhere, and he didn't want to keep taking their money. Richard Ojeda could have remained in the race if he was a billionaire. So it's becoming a privilege that you can run for president and be successful in politics if you have a lot of money. That's destabilizing to democracy. Capitalism and democracy are fundamentally incompatible. And these idiots are showing that to ordinary Americans. And to really demonstrate how these oligarchs have their heads up their own asses, look at the response that an oligarch gave to a question about AOC's tax rate at a recent summit in Davos.
There are growing calls to address these inequalities, particularly the wage inequality, with more taxes. In particular, in the United States, there's been a call by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to tax people earning over $10 million at a 70% tax rate. The current top rate in the United States is 37%. Michael Dell, do you support this?
I just want to say I'm thrilled that they're asking.
Wow. Well, look, I mean, you know, my wife and I set up a foundation about 20 years ago, and we would have contributed quite a bit more than a 70% tax rate on my income, on my annual income. And I feel much more comfortable with our ability as a private foundation to allocate those funds than I do giving them to the government.
All right.
So no, I'm not supportive of that.
Well, Keith,
and I don't think it would help the growth of the U.S. economy.
Oh, that's interesting. And can you say a little bit more about why? Why you don't think it would?
Well, name a country where that's worked, ever.
United States.
Briefly, in the 80s.
No. From about the 1930s through about the 1960s, the tax rate averaged about 70%. At times, it was up as high as 95%. And those were actually pretty good years for growth. So I don't have a strong opinion on that proposal. A lot of the devil is in the details. But I think it's there's actually a lot of economics that suggests that it's not necessarily going to hurt growth.
These oligarchs aren't concerned with the pesky facts. In fact, they don't even know what the facts are, because they don't need to know what the facts are. They don't need to know how valuable a marginal tax rate on wealth above 10 million can be to ordinary Americans. They don't have to care, because they are completely out of touch with the struggle of everyday Americans. So while people in Flint still don't have clean drinking water, while people die every single year because they don't have health insurance, while elderly people are cutting their pills in half in this country, these oligarchs are complaining because we want to tax them a little bit more so we can have just a fraction of the comfort that they experience. And they can't deal with that. They can't have it because they want to have it all. It's the definition of greed. So we're getting to the point where we can't just talk about taxing these oligarchs more. We need to take their wealth, seize their assets, and make sure we don't have billionaires anymore. The billionaire, as it stands now, should go extinct. Not meaning that we should harm these individuals physically, meaning that there should not be billionaires. Take their wealth until they're no longer billionaires, because every single billionaire is a policy failure. And that's something that we have to accept. It may be a fact that makes people feel uncomfortable, but if you truly care about democracy and want to live in a thriving democracy, we just can't have these people who are so wealthy that they amass wealth and power that is strong enough to actually threaten democracy itself. That just can't happen. So you've got to pick billionaires or democracy. That's a question that we're faced with. And I think that the answer is really clear, especially after hearing these assholes talk recently. Take their wealth. We shouldn't have billionaires.
Subscribe if you like this video, folks. Mike's tremendous, and he's doing a really, really good job. Many people are telling me about how wonderful the Humanist Report is. Bigly.